Hello and welcome to RS Agarwal's IAS. In this video, the Daily News Express, let us discuss the important topics appearing in the Hindu newspaper dated 3rd November 2020. Let us start. The first topic talks about education and about the national education policy. It focuses on the federal aspect of the national education policy, and this caters to GS paper 2 issues related to education and also polity and governance. So the author tries to explain about the federal nature with regards to education or vis-a-vis education. He speaks about how national education policy caters to this aspect of how this subject of education is divided between the center and the state. Firstly, he gives us a little bit of backdrop about how this subject called as education has moved from completely centers orientation towards the states orientation as well. He talks about how education system in India evolved through provinces, where in the British times there were several provinces and they had their own kinds of education system, while some provinces made it compulsory while some did not. And then he speaks about how 100 years ago a central advisory board for education was created. Now this central advisory board for education was just a discussion forum but did not predominantly speak about how states have to play a role or a center has to play a role or such things. Then came the constitution after independence, and which provided enough power to the states to take care of their educational needs and to take care of the current societal makeup that the states are living in. After that, we can talk about the Ministry of Education that was created, and here center became very powerful, but it must be noted that center did not dictate terms to the state, and freedom or leeway was provided to the states to make their own laws, regulations and systems with regards to education. Now this Ministry of Education in the center was not just there for decorative purposes but also there to articulate aims and standards. It was there to articulate aims and standards. Then the author talks about how new educational institutions were established in the country, like the Kendra Vidyalayas, etc., which was predominantly through the center and not for the states as such. And later, with the 42nd Amendment or so, education was moved to the state list. From which list? Write to me in the comment section. Now education is in the state list, and of course we have the emergence of the private sector after it went on to the state list, and a lot of chaos is there right now because there is existence of layers and layers. So many government schools are there, private schools are there. They are all doing what they wish, and they are working according to their whims and fancy. So the author, after giving us a background, goes a little bit deeper to explain how the system is currently today. He speaks about existence of three systems in the country, not one education system but three systems in the country. The first is a central system which has an all India reach, and then there is the state system or the schools that are affiliated to the state boards and teaching in state language as such, or give a focus to state language. Like Gujarat mein there is Gujarati, and in Odisha there is Odia, etc. And then he talks about the private system. The private system, which is going according to own wishes, going according to its own ways. It is globally accredited or internationally accredited, so on and so forth. Now he talks about how there is a difference, there is a strong difference between the three systems that exist, and how integrating these three systems will make a more federal and a more calmer education system. Now he speaks about RTE, or the Right to Education Act, which tried to bridge this gap, by empowering the various stratas of the society or provide social justice. But even though this act came into existence, and even though it had a predominant role to play as a central law or a parliamentary legislation, the coordination between the three systems was not manageable. It was very tough to manage coordination between the three systems, and even today when we are in 2020, RTE came long ago. Even when we are in 2020, the same problem persists, and inequalities are just getting sharper and sharp. This is what the author tries to say. Let's come to the last leg of this article. Author says that the policy that is created now, that is the national education policy or the new education policy of 2020, should talk about reconciliation of problems between the three systems and try to integrate them. So the author says before we come up with any kind of policy, we have to ask ourselves what kind of a society do we need, or what kind of a system are we looking at. We also have to understand, or we have to question from not just from the philosophical point of view but also from the institutional point of view, to ask how much recovery do we need, what is the kind of recovery do we need, and what are the functions that are needed here. And based on these questions a policy should be formed, is what the author says. Very simply he says both for recovery from the institutional decay and for further progress a policy should be made to recover from the institutional decay and further progress. Now if you talk about the policy and RTE for higher education, RTE doesn't even apply to higher educational institutions, so that becomes completely out of picture, right? That's a different thing altogether. And another thing that comes into picture is privatization, about how privatization has gone up and above, and how national education policy does not cater to this idea of privatizing education, but it does not even give a little bit of insight about how this private education is somewhat very tough and going on to decay the educational setup. He talks about how national education policy should talk about consolidation, should talk about coordination and managing these three systems. And he says dysfunction should be stopped by the national education policy. Hence the author says the most important thing is to have an education system that is managed at all the levels and is coordinated at all the levels. The new policy proposes a post RTE structure shift, which was initially the pre RTE structure shift. Now it proposes a post RTE structure shift, and this again has a very important role to play, is what the author says. So we have to understand the thing that the National Education Policy 2020 underestimates the problem of reconciling three systems of education in India. So this is the simple question that he puts forth. How to reconcile this push with the necessity of equitable public education is another important question that the author throws at us. So this is a very deep, insightful article about the problem, one of the important problems that the national education policy suffers from. With this, let us move on to the next one. Here we are talking about inflation and the aspect of RBI's accountability. This article caters to GS paper 3 economy. So let us learn what this article is trying to say, and then we will discuss about inflation. So the author in this article says that inflation today has breached the target which was set, right? It has, so when this inflation is set, there is a moderate level, there is upper tolerance level, there is lower tolerance level, but now the inflation has gone above the upper tolerance level, and it is above 6%. That means, so the upper tolerance level was 6%, is gone above that. Now what happens at this point in time? At this point in time, RBI comes into picture, and RBI is one of the bodies, like the Monetary Policy Committee, an important body that is in charge of targeting inflation in the country and to keeping inflation at the moderate level in the country. So what does RBI do? RBI writes a report to the center about why this happened, what went wrong, and what RBI is planning to do. So considering these three aspects, a report will be written by RBI to the center, and next actions will be taken. And that is exactly what they are going to do, how they are going to modify the rates, alter the rates, what are the aims that they are looking at to enhance transparency, accountability to the central bank, and what are the next steps for inflation targeting, is what the RBI does, because they are answerable to the government. Now the RBI in this report has said that due to data limitations, the targeting was not on point, because due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, we could not get real-time data. As a result, inflation has shot up, and RBI is taking several stance, or monetary policy is taking various stance, considering now the lockdown has opened. According to the real-time information, various stances are going to be taken, where they are going to consider various aspects with regards to inflation. So this is how the article speaks about what is happening and what is supposed to be done. Let us not go into the details of what RBI, or how much numbers that RBI is going to play with regards to the rates. But let us understand some basics about inflation. First, we all know that inflation is a situation where the general price level has gone up of goods and services. The general price level of goods and services has gone up. Now, this happens because there is money in the economy that has gone up. That is the money supply in the economy, or simply to say, purchasing power of the people has gone up. That is why inflation has shot up from the normal limit. Now there is various kinds. You can talk about inflation from the producer level, right? You can talk about the producer price index. You can talk about the wholesale level or the wholesale price index. You can talk about the consumer or the retail level, that is the consumer price index. So these are the three tools that RBI uses or the government uses to calculate inflation in the economy. Apart from that, what we can learn today is two types of inflation, that is the headline inflation and core inflation. Now, if you talk about headline inflation, it is a measure of total inflation in the economy. This includes food also, this include fuel prices also, and all other commodities. But what is core inflation? Core inflation is a term used to denote inflation that does not include food, fuel, and such vulnerable commodities, right? So this is the two difference. It measures only core and this measures everything. So these are two types of inflation. Now what causes inflation? Predominantly is the increase in money supply or the purchasing power of the people increases. But in general, inflation is divided into two types: the causes, that is demand pull and cost push. Demand pull, you can talk about rise in population. If the population rises, their money has risen and they want more products, so the prices increase. Then you can talk about black money. The existence of black money can give rise to inflation in the economy. Then you can talk about rise in income. If the income of the people rises, their purchasing power increases and hence inflation also increases. Then you can talk about excessive or increase in government expenditure. If the government provides the people with a lot of money through schemes and other kind of social interventions, that the people purchasing power will increase. So this is demand pull inflation, where demand influences the rise of inflation in the economy. And then we're talking about cost push inflation, where you can talk about how cost influences the rise of prices. Here factors like MSP come into picture, right? You can talk about international prices, how international prices affect the cost push inflation, where the rise in international prices or fall in international prices affect India's inflation. Then you can talk about indirect taxes, where there is rise in indirect taxes and this leads to inflation in the economy, and such factors play an important role in the cost push inflation. So these are the two types of inflation that we need to know. So what does RBI do at this point in time? RBI can take two types of measures: qualitative measures and quantitative measures. So there are various types of measures that RBI takes, and among the quantitative measures you have the rates, the CRR, the repo rate, the reverse repo rate, etc., where RBI alters these rates according to the situation present, or qualitative measures where they are importing more, or they are stopping the imports, or they are stopping government spending, so on and so forth. So these are some brief explanation about how inflation functions in the economy. Let us move on to the next topic. So here we are talking about how pandemic has affected nutrition in the country, or predominantly the nutrition of children in the country. This caters to GS paper 2 with regards to issues related to education and issues related to health. So here we are talking about how nutrition plays an important role in a child's life and how COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the situation of nutrition in the country. Now the author mentions about a report called as the a report of state of food security and nutrition in the world. State of food security and nutrition in the world, released by FAO. Now this report says that the problem in the country today is about how this report says that the closing of schools due to pandemic has worsened the children's health, and 369 million children are affected due to this, not only in India but across the world, but a bulk of 369 million children live in India. This article also talks about the global hunger index, in which India has ranked 94 out of 107 countries, and it is lower than the others Now, this global hunger index talks about not just undernutrition but also stunting, mortality, wasting, etc. Apart from this, the article mentions another important report released by ILO, UNICEF, that if the lockdowns do not reopen quickly, the child or the children will get into child labor. It says child labor will be a predominant factor if the schools do not open, and the social security of the children will be at risk. Now, if you talk about the Indian context, you can talk about the midday meal scheme. So, in the midday meal scheme, you know that children were provided with freshly cooked meals in the afternoon, and the children would come to the school and consume these meals so that they would stay healthy. Now, there was a few things about this meal. It would provide 450 calories of energy, 12 grams of protein, and other micronutrients like folic acid, vitamin A, etc. So this was at least one third of what a child would need would be sufficiently provided so that the child's health is managed. But since the COVID-19 pandemic has stuck, the schools are closed, and these children who would come to school with a hungry stomach and predominantly rely on these midday meals have completely faltered, or the energy or the health factor of these children has completely fallen, because since they are from the vulnerable section, they have no affordability to food security, they have no access to food at all. So what was done in order to replace this? In order to replace this, the government said, of course, we cannot provide freshly cooked midday meals to the children. So we will provide dry ration to the children in replacement or as an alternative to this, so that their health and nutrition is maintained. But the article says that this scheme was not very successful, as a lot of people did not even have the means to travel and take it, or the lot of people did not even have the accessibility to cook it. Apart from this, the author or the editorial also, the article also talks about how the states failed to procure it in the right manner. A lot of states procured it. They did very well with regards to this dry ration distribution, where a lot of states, the procurement from the states was very irregular and mismanaged. The other worrying angle is the fact that there are reports of children engaging in labor, right? Children are going to labor, or children are going to work because they want to supplement the family's income, and they want to be a support to the family, because the family has literally no income. Their parents would have lost the job, and now they will be going to labor so that they can also get food in this aspect. Now, what we can do to overcome this problem? Of course, the schools are still not open. In some regions they are open, but in some regions they are not, and the distribution is not even, it's not equal and proper. Hence, the author says we can undertake innovative strategies. The first innovative strategies is how the author points out how a local smallholder farmer how a local smallholder farmer should be directly connected with the midday meal system, so that he would supply all kinds of basic facilities, or the basic kind of needs like vegetables, cereals, eggs, so that these midday meal systems could provide cooked food to the rural families or the children who are living in that particular area. So this can be a very nice and a decentralized approach, linking a smallholder farmer to the local midday meal scheme, and this can talk about Atmanirbhar Poshan, as the author says. Apart from this, he also mentions about how there are new initiatives like the school nutrition garden. School nutrition garden, that is nothing but kitchens that are there, which will provide the right kind of materials or the right kind of resources they need, like vegetables, cereals, etc., will be grown there, and this will be provided. And besides ensuring functional or hot meals, they can provide eligible children to the plan to prepare and distribute the meals. So the children themselves can take this produce, and plan can prepare these meals, and they can also somewhat start like a urban canteen or a community kitchen as. Most important, and the third one that the authors talk about here, is how locally produced vegetables and fruits should be added to the midday meal scheme. The locally produced fruits and vegetables should be added, which will provide not just an extra source of income to the farmers, but also provide extra nutrition to the children. So here we are talking about so many aspects, and not just about COVID-19 pandemic. We are talking about how COVID-19 pandemic has affected the healths of children because of the closure of the schools, and the government has to take immediate innovative steps in order to revitalize this problem, or as the global hunger index suggests, we will fall lower and lower with regards to hunger, nutrition, anemia, stunting, wasting, etc. I hope this concept is clear. Let us move on to the next topic. Here we are talking about serological surveys. The talk of herd immunity and the pandemic caters to GS paper 2 as well as the GS paper 3. Now, let's not go into the most detailed metaphysical calculations done by these authors, but I will give you a brief idea about what they're talking about. First, they're talking about serological surveys, which are surveys done in order to test the antibodies in your body if you will be able to fight a pandemic like COVID-19, or if you have already fought it. So this is the basic idea of serological surveys, to detect the prevalence of antibodies against a pandemic like COVID-19. Their purpose is to measure the proportion of a population which is already infected, the proportion of population which is already infected and that has tested positive and has fought the pandemic in the right manner. So we have to understand that the whole population will not be taken into picture, but most of its population will be taken, as they will fight and they will develop something called as a herd immunity. Herd immunity is where there is a segment of two segments of population, where this segment of population is immune to this virus called XYZ, and since they are immune to this virus, because because of reasons like they've already fought it, or their human genetic makeup is very strong, or their immunity in general is very strong, they will not transfer this virus to this segment of population. That means the transmission of virus will be reduced by at least 50% and prevalence will be reduced by at least 50%. So this is called as herd immunity, where this herd is stronger than this herd. That means there will be reduced transmission. Then you can talk about how the serological surveys were undertaken to talk about the condition of the immunity in today's population in the country, and several samples were tested. Now, what did these antibody tests tell us? They told us that antibodies are the footprints of the host's response to virus infection. So it is like a footprint, that how exactly has your body fought the virus. So their presence in the blood serum confirms past infection. Predominantly it talks about how there has been past infections, but this antibody test can also throw surprises. See, the author says that the antibody prevalence data derived from serological survey must be interpreted with caution and correction factors, because several things come into picture. Now, we cannot say that the way everyone's body fights with a virus will be exactly same, right? So this person called as A could have fought it in a different manner. This person B could have fought it in a different manner. Now, the body responds to various things here. Now, if you talk about COVID-19 pandemic only, if you talk about COVID-19 pandemic, four antigens are selected, right? Four antigens are selected, and the time that they appear to fight this pandemic is counted. This is the most important thing, and this thing varies with individual to individual. It is not same for all individuals, so this becomes a very important factor, and the people who are conducting this antibody test or serological survey should not be biased, or should not interpret it in the wrong manner, because you are basing this for the entire population of the country, or you're giving this as a good hope for the entire population of the country. So what you do becomes very important, is what the author says. Going further, he mentions about a publication. He mentions about a publication in this journal called as the Journal of American Medical Association, along with the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, this journal say that people with asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic infections, antibody levels in them decline 50%, and they reach initial stages in the 36 days. So this is a bias, or this is a problem that exists when we do the antibody test. So we should not get driven, or we should not get moved away by these kind of things, that antibodies will eventually go back in most people or in all people. So these are the things we need to consider, and we also have to consider how ICMR has played an important role. If you talk about ICMR, that is the Indian Council for Medical Research, it has conducted two serological surveys. The first survey measured S1 antibody, which was there in human body in India, and then the second survey used another antigen. So the latent period between the infection and the appearance of detectable antibody is 4 weeks. So the survey, the results of the serological survey 1 will differ from the serological survey 2. Hence, because of all these things, cautious interpretation is very, very important. It has to be cautiously interpreted to arrive at a true level. We should not get attracted towards this kind of problems or don't get flow away with this kind of problems. And if the results are grossly underestimated, the true prevalence or the finding out of true prevalence will become very, very difficult, and the consequences will be on the entire population of the country, not just one or two population. Now the authors are of the opinion that India is very unlikely to see another wave because we have already seen enough, and our immunities are developing, and we need a mark of 60% of immunity level to end this epidemic, that is in India itself, not a pandemic, in epidemic. And we have almost reached the halfway mark. In a few days or in a few months of time we will be reaching the other, and then we can avoid this kind of another wave that the author says. So what is important is that the author says here that we have to take precautions, we have to be very, very cautious, we have to wear a mask, we have to avoid going outside for useless things. So if these things are taken into consideration in the right manner, it becomes more easy for us to curb this epidemic in India in a very, very predominant manner. And he talks about how major festivals have come into picture now, and several things are going on. Theaters have opened, so many things are going on. So if these things are existing, we have to be again mostly very, very careful to fight this pandemic, and we have to take utmost and the most important measures to fight this pandemic. That's it about this article. So you read this title very carefully. Serological surveys underestimate building of herd immunity. So antibody prevalence data derived from the serological surveys must be interpreted with caution and correction factors. Let us move on to the next topic. Here we are talking about IPC, or the Indian Penal Code, caters to GS paper 2, GS paper 3 and your prelims examination. Now the government wants to overhaul the IPC, or the Indian Penal Code, and the government has been talking about it since a very, very long time. Now states' suggestions has been sought. Now what is IPC? IPC stands for the Indian Penal Code. You know that it is a code of all the important laws, or the penalties or punishments, or however things are in the country. It's a penal code, right? So this came into existence in the year 1860. Of course, the work for it was started way before, but then it came into force in the year 1860. It was prepared by the first law commission in the country, chaired by T.B. Macaulay or Thomas Babington Macaulay. Thomas Babington Macaulay was a lawyer. If you have studied your modern history syllabus, you will also remember Macaulay's Minute for Education, which is very important, during the time of which Governor General, that you can write to me in the comment section. So Thomas Babington Macaulay played a very important role in development of the Indian Penal Code. It was the first ever law commission. He codified all these laws and put forth a structure called as the Indian Penal Code. Before this, several normal various things existed, and he codified them all together. And do you believe it? Something that was formed in 1860, we still follow it in the year 2020. Now that puts forth a question that we need to overhaul this system of Indian Penal Code, and requires a revision to meet what is the 21st century norm. To meet the 21st century norm. And even when Macaulay's time, he had to go through a lot of revisions to come to this clear picture, and now we are almost 200 years ahead. We need the right kind of amendments to this law. Now it talks about how even though the IPC has been amended 75 times haphazardly, no proper revision was taken place of this law, and normal small minute amendments were made. So again, another reason why we need to amend it. Then most amendments have been ad hoc or temporary, or just a reactive response, not a permanent response. So again, another important thing. So there is another mention of how there are several laws that are pretty ambiguous, like the sedition law, which is ambiguous. There is the offense of blasphemy, right, which is in the section 250 295A. Then you can talk about several other things on these lines, like how there is distinction between culpable homicide and murder. So all these things become very metaphysical. Let's not go there. But these are several reasons why we need to speak. So if you remember section 377, so as you know, section 377 criminalized homosexuality, but the same people who did it, the British, they decriminalized it in their homeland. So that is why we need to overhaul this system, which is almost 200 years old or so. So 1860 May it came into existence, and now it is going for a reform. Hopefully the Ministry of Home Affairs, which will be the nodal ministry for this, will take it into consideration, and important inputs will be provided for various ministries starting from the law ministry. Right, let us move on to the last discussion of the day. Here we are talking about the Gilgit-Baltistan region. Again, come into picture because Gilgit-Baltistan, to be a full province, said Pakistan Prime Minister. So if you see the map, this is the area of the Gilgit-Baltistan, right? This is Gilgit located here. Now the importance of Gilgit is that it connects Pakistan occupied Kashmir, it connects China, it connects Afghanistan, it connects Jammu and Kashmir, and it connects Pakistan. So it becomes like a exact middle heartland for the region. Now this Gilgit-Baltistan uh, functioned as a has functioned as a provincial autonomous region since the year 2009. Please remember this. It has functioned as a provincial autonomous region since the year 2009, and Pakistan has aimed to have it completely under its control, and it has its own regional assembly and it has its own elected chief minister. Now it becomes a very important part for India because it is a map of India, and Pakistan has taken it in a very wrong manner, and new plans are coming up there. People are Pakistan is having its own plans, China is having its own plans, because CPEC is passing through Gilgit Baltistan. So this is China, right? This is China. See, if you see this China Tibet, this is China. So CPEC will pass through this like this to connect Pakistan and China through the Gilgit Baltistan region. So again, they have their own things to do here. So we have to understand that this is a very diplomatic move that India will be making, or India's steps will be very calculated. So let us see how we will try to take back Gilgit Baltistan, and how this problem will be stalled, and how India will respond to this statement of Pakistan PM. Before this, he had told that it will be a part of Pakistan, and we will release a map where we will put it in the part of Pakistan for permanently and things like that. So let us see how this will pan out in the future and what response India will give. That's it for today's DNE. If you have any doubts or some kind of discrepancies, write to me in the comment section. If you have any more discussions to share, write to me in the comment section. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.